Hello friends, I'm Fargo, and welcome to the first episode of my new series, Activity Ace. In this series, I'll be going over everything activity related, from strategies to statistics, and guides to your favorite minigames. Today I'll be going over the trolley games, more specifically which ones give the most jellybeans. So you might be thinking, alright, isn't it obvious? Treasure Dive clearly gives the most jellybeans. So why are we making this video? Alright, I can't just say Treasure Dive good and end the video there. That would be ridiculous. There's a lot more to talk about. For instance, which is the worst in terms of jellybeans per second? Or which is the fastest trolley game with the highest payout? Is Jungle Vines really the worst game? Well, I'll be answering all of these questions in this video, ranking the main 15 trolley games from best to worst in terms of jellybean payout, time spent, and if it's worth it depending on the toon skill. For my tests, I played 5 of each single player and multiplayer trolley game, and I calculated the jellybeans awarded based on my performance. Now, I've been playing Toontown for about a decade and a half, so I have most if not all of these games down to muscle memory. If you have any doubt that my data isn't accurate, just know I have 16 years experience with trolley games, which can be a stark contrast to someone who just installed the game. As a side note, all of the trolley games done will be in Drowsy Dreamland for the sake of consistency and jellybean output. So with this in mind, I'll be calculating not only the best scores, but my worst scores to determine which minigames are best for who, and which trolley games someone with less experience would have an easier time competing successfully compared to a veteran. I'll be going through the single player games first, in no particular order, then move on to the multiplayer trolley games. I'll be giving a simple description of each trolley game, ranking their challenge, and examining their time spent to jellybeans earned ratios. By the time I'm finished, I'll be giving each trolley game a definitive rank based on the difficulty, time, and jellybeans earned. Please keep in mind that Photo Fun and Toon Escape are not in the normal Corporate Clash rotation, so I won't be going over these two games. If you'd like me to make a video on these two trolley games at some point, please leave a comment down below. Now that you're all up to speed, I'll be sending you off to my good pal Corky Boingenbacher. Let's hop right to it. Part 1. Single Player. First on my list, just to get it out of the way, is of course Treasure Dive. A bit of TLDR, you collect treasure chests, bring them to the boat, and avoid the fish. Pretty simple, right? Well, if I were to rank this game in terms of difficulty, it really depends on the toon. In Drowsy Dreamland, the fish are very active, and the king crabs at the bottom are ferocious, so unless you're playing Treasure Dive in Toontown Central, this game, by my hypothesis, would be very difficult for new toons. That said, this game technically has the highest payout in terms of playtime, since Treasure Dive lasts approximately 74 seconds, and a single chest equivalates to 72 jellybeans. That's nearly 1 jellybean a second. The highest amount of chests a single toon can collect is 3 chests. That makes a nice even 216 jellybeans. That's 3 times the time you spent in the trolley game, and also the highest payout possible from a solo trolley run. If you were to collect 3 chests 5 times in a row, that would equivalent to a whopping 1080 jellybeans. If there's one trolley game to get good at, it's this one. Second here on my list is Cannon Game. Veterans love it, new toons don't understand it. It's a classic. All that goes into this one is you fire a toon out of a cannon and land in the water tower in the field. This game ranks somewhere in the middle in terms of difficulty. On one hand, this can be an incredibly easy game by just clipping through the water tower, but don't tell anyone I told you that. But for anyone that doesn't know this strategy, 3 or 4 attempts at it should warrant a decent reward. If you're really good at this game, you can finish it in less than 5 seconds of the timer starting, which puts it fairly high on the time spent in the minigame. The maximum amount of jellybeans possibly attainable in Cannon Game is 68, and that's only if you clip through the water tower. On an average run of Cannon Game, you can expect 40 to 50 jellybeans. Keep in mind that you have 89 seconds to do so, which means it's completely dependent on the toon whether or not you get a good time spent to jellybeans earned ratio out of this minigame. If you were to play through Cannon Game 5 times with a perfect first try score of 68, you'd have about 340 jellybeans. Compared to Treasure Dive, it's not as adequate, but still a decent payout. Ah yes, Toon Memory Game, my favorite trolley game. Although, not very reliable source of jellybeans, it's one of the only trolley games that requires certain mental fortitude to get a high amount of jellybeans. All you have to do is memorize, match, and score bonus points when possible, The more flips you make in vain, the worse your score will become. This trolley game is more up to the individual when it comes to how it's played, more so for the fact that there are many different ways to play it. One method, which I like to call the brute force method, is when you spam the flip key until something happens, or you clear the board. I like to write off this method for the simple fact that doing it this way will jeopardize your score drastically, and allot you far less jellybeans. The brute force method may give less than 20 jellybeans, which is why I do not recommend it. If you want to hear more about memory methods in the future, make sure to share this video with your friends. However, I digress. Toon memory game lasts approximately 89 seconds, unless you clear the board early. If you clear the board with a green flip to score balance by the end of the game, you can receive up to 70 to 80 jellybeans. Not to mention if you finish early, you might end up with a positive time spent to jellybeans earned ratio as well. If you were to stay in the green to green for 5 games, your reward will be around 375, which is better than Cannon Game, but not any better than Treasure Dive. This makes Toon Memory Game a fairly decent way to farm beans, but it's certainly less reliable for the sheer fact that it takes a bit of brain power to score highly. If memorization is not your strong suit, then Toon Memory Game might not be for you. On to one of the big ones, and I don't just mean file size. Toon Slingshot is fairly self-explanatory. Just press the left and right keys to shimmy your toon down a successful launch. Then land on one of the many targets scattered in the valley. And don't forget about those trampolines in case you mess up. So Toon Slingshot is one of the 2 single-player trolley games without a timer. You have 10 seconds to launch your toon, and an average round takes anywhere between 15 and 30 seconds. Since there are 3 rounds of Toon Slingshot, a single game of Toon Slingshot can take up to 90 seconds, which is not ideal. Depending on your skill level, the game can take any amount of time within the 90-second margin, or even longer if you're indecisive on where to land or if you bounce on a trampoline. Despite this, the game's jellybean payout is pretty substantial, sitting at a solid 84 jellybeans if you manage to land on the black circle. Keep in mind that in Corporate Clash, the game ends if you land on the highest possibly achievable score, so landing on the black circle first try puts this trolley game high on the rankings in terms of time spent and jellybeans earned. Landing on the highest scoring circle first try for 5 games will allot 420 jellybeans, which is pretty good, but nothing compared to Treasure Dive. Overall, this trolley game is a fun one to play for all skill levels, and even more of a challenge to master in Drowsy Dreamland. Not to mention, it's quite the high roller if you know what you're doing. The next game on our list is Tug of War single player, another classic game that can be found in the Toon parties of old. Here's a brief explanation of the game. Just press your left and right keys and time with the red line on the power meter to sync the cog. It's as easy as that. Now, Tug of War is one of the shortest trolley games on our list, sitting at an annoyingly uneven 39 seconds. However, don't let that timer fool you, because the game can end quicker than that. Truth be told, if you're a competent enough toon, this game can end in less than 5 seconds, meaning its time spent to jellybeans earned ratio is through the roof. However, this game is probably one of the only trolley games to have a set jellybean count before you even start. What I mean by this is the jellybeans you earn are all dependent on the cog you're up against. This is just speculation, but looking at the data, it suggests that higher tier cogs give more jellybeans than other cogs. For instance, if you're wrangling a head honcho and sync them within the 39 seconds, you'll be rewarded with 57 jellybeans. This also goes for tier 7 cogs as well, meaning tier 7 and above will always give 57 beans. Regardless of how long it takes to sync them, for cogs that are tier 3 to 6, you will be given 51 jellybeans. And for cogs lower than tier 3, you'll always get 47. Now, if your RNG is perfect on 5 games, you can expect a total of 285 jellybeans, which isn't too bad, but it's definitely not always possible with this game because of the RNG. Now, despite the cog RNG, it's still worth it to play this game if you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on farming jellybeans. However, your keyboard might not appreciate the spam. In terms of recommending this game to newer toons, it's easy enough to figure out, but it's a good alternative if you just needed a few more jellybeans for that Drowsy Dreamland doodle you've been wanting for so long. I know you want that doodle. Now keep in mind that I will be coming back to this trolley game when we get to the multiplayer segment, as it doubles down as a multiplayer experience as well as a single player experience, so stay tuned for that. And now to my least favorite trolley game, and yours as well, Cog Thief. Now I get it, Cog Thief is alright with more tunes, but it's nearly impossible with one tune. Trust me when I say this, out of all the trolley games, Cog Thief is probably the most challenging game to do solo. Just a simple description of the game, you have 4 barrels and infinite pies. Defend the barrels from the cogs for as long as you can to get more jelly beans. Cog Thief lasts about 59 seconds, and you start with 9 jelly beans. The jelly beans you earn go up by a factor of 1 and 2 in an alternating pattern. This means you can earn about 70 to 80 jelly beans if the math is correct. However, due to the difficulty of the game and the limitation of the angles you can throw from, it requires a certain precision that not a lot of people have. For this reason, Cog Thief is just not an ideal way to attain jelly beans. The best I could manage solo was 39 jelly beans, so if you scored 39 for 5 games, you'd gain about 195 jelly beans. However, if you're a top tier gamer and can score 70 for 5 games, you can total up to 350 jelly beans with Cog Thief. Not a fantastic payoff for such a tedious trolley game. Ah, good old ring game. I used to grind this trolley game in TTO back when I was a mere child. And look how far I've come. Ring game is fairly easy, just swim through the hoops and don't bump into anyone. That's it. By far, ring game probably has the worst payout of any single player trolley game, and should be avoided at all costs if you're looking to grind jelly beans. Ring game is another trolley game that doesn't have a timer anywhere on the screen, but I was able to calculate it, and one game comes out to about 52 seconds. This is a terrible time, since the maximum amount of jelly beans you can get out of ring game solo is 32 beans. Compared to the other games, this is a terrible time spent to jelly beans earned ratio. This is roughly 0.35 beans for every second spent in ring game, which is abhorrent considering what you could be doing for less time and more beans. Perfecting ring game 5 times will give you about 160 beans. Need I say more? As for difficulty, this trolley game is fairly easy early game, but gets progressively more difficult if you're in a higher tier playground. In my humble opinion, this trolley game is less of a bean earner and more of a fun trolley game to enjoy with your friends. If you aren't grinding beans, then this trolley game is fine, I guess. It's time to talk about the Pac-Man ripoff that is the maze game, one of my favorite trolley games of all time. This one is fairly straightforward. Just navigate the maze and avoid the cogs. The maze game lasts a locked time of 59 seconds and gives 61 beans for a perfect solo run. This is a positive net value in terms of time spent and jelly beans earned, which means the maze game is well worth it if you perfect the maze game every time. However, for an average tune, scores can range between 20 and 50, which makes the maze game less viable if you aren't perfecting it every time. Although this is one of my favorite trolley games, I cannot fully recommend it, as for some players, the maze game might just not be as consistent as they'd want. Especially in Drowsy Dreamland where the cogs are faster than you all the time. However, perfecting the maze game 5 times gives a nice 305 jelly beans, which is still pretty decent by all regards, but with difficulty in mind, it's a bit of a learning curve, but can be overcome with some practice. Alright, time to finally answer the question of the night. Is Jungle Vines the worst trolley game? Well, Jungle Vines is a game where you swing from the left side of the screen to the right by vine. Avoid the wild jungle creatures and collect as many bananas as possible. Okay, so is it the worst? If we look at the data, no, it's actually one of the better trolley games by a wide margin. Jungle Vines lasts about 69 seconds, and depending on your performance, you can obtain up to 90 plus jelly beans. My best run was 93 jelly beans, which may have been due to how fast I was able to complete the course, my consistency with jumps without being hit, as well as my banana count by the end. A lot of factors seem to go into what you can get out of Jungle Vines, but if you get really good at it, your payout will be nearly as good as a treasure dive run. If you were to get a consistent score of 90 in Jungle Vines for 5 games, you're looking at 450 Jellybeans, which puts Jungle Vines in second place in terms of most Jellybeans you can get out of a Trolley game. However, for the average toon that isn't as good at Jungle Vines as I am, you may be looking at a very sorry time spent to Jellybeans earned ratio, sitting between 20 to 60 Jellybeans. This means that if you aren't amazing at Jungle Vines, gaining Jellybeans by playing it will be much harder for you. Jungle Vines is also less reliable due to the difficulty spike, as well as the bugginess of the game itself, which is why this Trolley game scores averagely on our list. Here's one that I rarely play. It's a little note called Catching Game. Turns out it's just as bad as I thought it was. Catching Game is another game from the Toon parties of old. All you do is catch fruit, avoid the cogs, and dodge the anvils. This is a 52-second long game that has a maximum payout of 42 Jellybeans, making it one of the worst games to play for beans, just above Ring Game. However, you can only get 42 if you perfect the Trolley game, meaning the time spent to Jellybeans earned ratio can be far worse. My worst catching game score was 23, nearly 0.5 Jellybeans per second, which is not a very good ratio at all. The game itself isn't too challenging, however, and missing a fruit only really drops the Jellybean count by a small margin. With this in mind, sadly this Trolley game just isn't worth the time despite how easy it is. If you can manage to perfect the catching game for 5 games, you'll be rewarded with 210 Jellybeans. Let's have a look at the current rankings. It turns out Treasure Dive is still the best, but Trolley games such as the Ring Game, Cog Thief, and the Catching Game just won't be worth the effort and are probably better off skipped than played. I hope what I've said about the solo experience has been of some help. Now for the multiplayer games, which I'm happily joined by a good friend of mine, Skap. You can thank him for helping out by subscribing to his YouTube channel, link down below. Now let's not hesitate, this video is already way too long by this point. Part 2. Multiplayer. Welcome to the first multiplayer game on our list. Also the best experience giver, also the best Jellybean giver, also the buggiest game. Is there anything Toontag doesn't do? Well, actually, you can't play it solo, but that's one of its bigger downsides. Here, watch as I completely juke out my friend because of the lag. Toontag is very self-explanatory. Collect treasures, tag your friends. Toon Tag lasts for 59 seconds, and has a huge payout of 138 Jellybeans if you can collect 24 treasures. On an average run of Toon Tag, you can expect at least 78 to 90 Jellybeans if you and your friend are giving it your all, which is still a positive net value given the time. So yes, Toon Tag has a great time spent to Jellybeans earned ratio. Also, getting 24 treasures for 5 games will get you a whopping 690 Jellybeans, which is better than collecting 3 treasure chests in Treasure Dive 3 times over. Arguably, since collecting these chests 3 times in a row is more of a challenge than trading wins on Toontag for 5 games, it can be said that Toontag may as well be the best game for Jellybeans hands down. Not only because of its gracious experience system, but its massive Jellybean gain. If you're playing it legit, however, due to a mix of movement lag and the fact that you can sprint in Corporate Clash, makes trying to catch someone that's teleporting around the arena very challenging. That doesn't mean it's not doable. In fact, if you can time it right, you can catch your friend off guard fairly easily if you predict where they're going to go next. Even if you aren't doing too well in Toontag, the learning curve for predicting movement is not a steep one, and that puts this Trolley game fairly high on our list. Believe it or not, the race game is just as bad as the Ring Game. The race game is fairly one-dimensional. Roll dice to see how far you move on the game board, land on special spaces for a surprise. If there's one unique feature about the race game, it's that it's the only Trolley game that can last an infinite amount of time. The dice rolling timer starts at 20 seconds, and an average game of race game lasts somewhere between 40 and 60 seconds. That is, if everyone's cooperating. If no one's cooperating, the game can last forever. There is no overall timer for the race game. So theoretically, if you and your friend pick the same dice over and 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 over, the game will never end. In terms of Jellybeans, the winner of the race will receive 32 beans. Not a terrible payout for a game that lasts up to 40 seconds, or infinity if you have a devious toon in play. But overall, this trolley game is merely for fun and not intended for jellybean farming. There is no difficulty spike, as you only really need to press buttons to move forward, but an element of deception is needed for this one. Trick your friends into letting you pick the highest moving dice, or make a player lose by picking the exact number they need to get their special space on the board. It's a game of trickery, and it's a ton of fun. Winning 5 of these games will allot you 160 jellybeans, which is average for a low tier trolley game. A game that has since replaced Match Mini from TTO, this game is more fun with a friend than I give it credit. This is another self-explanatory game, match what the lead toon is doing for a high score. Like the race game, this trolley game is missing its timer, but has a timer for moves instead. Each round is allowed to last 9 seconds. The toon lead performs a move every half second, and there are 4 rounds. The toon lead needs to perform 8 moves by the end, which means he spends 17 seconds performing moves throughout the game. With this in mind, and accounting for downtime, matching game can only last 56 seconds, give or take. This also means the average run for matching game can last around 40 to 50 seconds, given how fast people input their match to be the winner of the round. So pretty normal for a trolley game at this point. However, the problem lies with the Jellybeans, as this game only gives 32 Jellybeans maximum. It's not a bad payout for the time spent to Jellybeans earned ratio, but it's still not an impressive game. Winning a game of matching game 5 times will only give 160, ranking it as one of the lower tier trolley games. Not only that, but to bring us back to Toon Memory Game, if you aren't good with memorization, or if you're not good with quick time events, this trolley game is not for you. Also, a side note before we move on to the next trolley game, the difficulty spike can be a bit inflated due to some of the lead toons being far too tall for the play space. So the arrow is sometimes skewed or not viewable at all. This is a case of RNG making the trolley game harder on accident and should probably be fixed. Well, we finally found it. The worst trolley game in terms of time spent to Jellybeans earned. In Ice Slide, your goal is to get as close to the center of the ring as possible. Watch out, because anyone can push you out of the middle, dodge TNTs, and collect Jellybean jars. This is another game where the timer is seldom there. Only in the positioning phase do you see a timer. Each round takes about 14 seconds, and there are 6 rounds. The time between launch and point tallying is a challenge to gauge, but it's safe to say that an average round of Ice Slide takes up 90 seconds thanks to the large amount of rounds within the game. My highest score in Ice Slide is 26, but my current hypothesis is that you can score up to 32 Jellybeans. However, this 32 cap is rather indeterminate for me at the current moment. Maybe I'll make a follow-up video to this one about Ice Slide if this video gets enough traction, but who knows. Although, I digress. As it stands right now, Ice Slide is likely the worst trolley game out of all the games for Jellybean payout and in general time spent to Jellybean ratio. When it comes to difficulty, this game isn't too difficult, but it's very easy to lose track of a lead if someone bumps you into a corner. Another devious trolley game that's fun, albeit a little long and tedious. Alright, we're about finished with our list. However, there's one thing I'd like to mention, and that's Tug of War. Toon versus Toon. Now, if you remember, Tug of War can give up to 57 Jellybeans against a cog. Going against another toon, however, lowers your chances for good beans. Defeating a toon in a game of Tug of War, you're only given 45 Jellybeans. The reason this may be the case is to possibly prevent win trading in Tug of War, but another reason may be that a toon's skill level is not as concrete as a cog's skill level. Since it's technically PvP, your challenge is dictated by an independent entity separated from the game's code, a wildcard if you will. So your challenge could either be as easy as pie, or impossibly difficult given the toon's ability to spam left and right, which is why it gives less Jellybeans. A fun fact about Toon versus Toon is that if you win a stalemate, you only get 36 Jellybeans, and the loser of the stalemate gets 24 Jellybeans. I find it interesting that both toons don't receive the same amount for a stalemate, but that might just be me. So if there's anything to take away from this, it's that you shouldn't play Tug of War with your friends for Jellybeans, only do it solo, or skip the Tug of War games where you face each other and just face off cogs with your friends. Part 3, Ranking Trolley Games. Alright, so we're finally at the end. Now it's time to sit down and rank all of these trolley games. I'm gonna go off script for this because, oh my gosh, this video was long. Alright, so 15th place, I'm going to be placing Ice Slide, just for the sheer fact that I'm not entirely sure if 26 is the final score. It probably is not, but as for now, my hypothesis still stands that it is the longest low tier trolley game with the lowest payout. So that's why it's at the very bottom. It takes way too much time for 32 Jellybeans, and that's why it's in 15th place. For 14th place, I'll be putting Matching Game down. So the reason this is going in here is because it's the same case for Ice Slide. It takes 56 seconds for Matching Game, and 32 is not a great payout for that. Can we take a guess at what 13th place is going to be? Well, sitting in 13th place is Ring Game. That's right, Ring Game, 52 seconds, 32 points, you get the gist. And for 12th place, you can probably guess which one it is. It's Race Game for 40 seconds, 32. So far, it's the best in terms of time, because that's what we're looking for, is time spent to Jellybean earned ratio. And 40 seconds to 32 Jellybeans, that's almost a Jellybean per second. So we'll be putting it above all the other muck, but it's still low on the board, for sure. Alright, coming up next in 11th place is Catching Game. 52 seconds, 42 perfect. And in 10th place, we're rounding off the double digits here with Cog Thief. 59 seconds, 75 Jellybeans estimate. Now, I'm not entirely sure about this one, because the reason it's so low is because although it's a high Jellybean payout if you know what you're doing, the difficulty spike is way too high. It's probably the most difficult trolley game on this list, which is why it's kind of in the middle, because you can get Jellybeans out of this game, it's just so difficult to do so, but it's not worse than Ice Slide, that's for sure. There's people out there that can play Cog Thief, and that's why it's in the middle range for this board. Alright, 9th place, going to Maze Game here. Maze Game, 50 seconds, 61 perfect. Next coming up here, 8th place, we have Toon Memory Game, 89 seconds, depending on if you get it early, 75 Jellybeans depending on your score. Up here, 7th place, we have Jungle Vines, 69 seconds, 90 plus, depending on the score. Okay, so some people are going to get mad at me for this, but I put Tug of War in 6th and 5th place because technically they're separate. Just because, you know, one's single player and one's multiplayer. I figured I'd separate them for the sake of clarity. But the reason why Tug of War multiplayer is lower than Tug of War single player is because there's a chance to get 45 beans for beating a Toon. Toon on Toon PvP is cool, but it doesn't give as many Jellybeans, which is why it's scoring lower. But you can get these Jellybeans in about 5 to 10 seconds, depending on how good you are at Tug of War. So that's a really, really good payoff. Really, really good time spent to Jellybeans earned ratio. It's really, really good, which is why it's scoring so high on the list. Next up, in 4th place, we have Cannon Game. Here we go. Got 89 seconds, 62 Jellybeans estimate. Depending if you're like really good at Cannon Game. You can probably get up to 68 if you're really good. But the reason it's so high, sure, it's a high number. That's 89 seconds you're wasting. But if you hit it first try, that's 5 seconds for 62 Jellybeans. and that is really good. That is really good. That is excellent. You wasted no time getting 62 jelly beans, and that's what we're looking for. Alright, in third place we have Toon Slingshot. This is the same scenario with Cannon Game. It says 90 seconds on the board, but this one's a higher payout, so if you can manage to land on that 84 perfect, that is excellent. Okay, we're on our last two here. Let's figure out what they are. You guys ready? We only have 2 games we haven't said. Treasure Dive, second place. Yeah, I know. I know. I'm sorry, guys. Look, I can explain myself. I can explain. Don't throw your tomatoes yet. Don't throw your tomatoes. Okay, so there's a reason. I'm going to talk about this. There's a reason I put Treasure Dive second place, and that's the difficulty spike. So if we're talking about the difficulty between Toon Tag and Treasure Dive, Toon Tag is a lot easier compared to Treasure Dive because getting those 3 treasures, it's a tricky one. Trying to get 3 treasures like that, it's something that takes a lot of practice, and that's the only way you could really get above Toon Tag is getting those 3 treasures consistently every time. But Toon Tag takes no skill whatsoever. You can just have an alt sit in the corner of the arena and you can just sit there and collect all the treasures yourself, and you'd end up getting more jelly beans than you would just trying to do Treasure Dive solo. It's kind of crazy how many jelly beans you can get out of Toon Tag. It's just so much better to play Toon Tag as opposed to Treasure Dive solo if you have an alt account, and that's why Toon Tag is first place. Alright, well, a little controversial to put anything above Treasure Dive, but after doing the math, it's just a little bit quicker, has less of a skill ceiling, and practically guarantees a high amount of jelly beans and experience overall. However, this doesn't mean I want to discourage anyone from playing a 4-toon Treasure Dive only session. This is merely circumstantial. If you don't have anyone to play with and want to do Trolley games solo, then bringing your alt along to trade wins in Toon Tag is far more viable than trying to solo Treasure Dive for 3 chests. Do you have your own hypothesis? Am I completely wrong? Please let me know what you think in the comments, as I'm genuinely curious of all your opinions. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell to get notified for when I vomit another 30-minute video. I want to thank Skap for coming along, and my girlfriend for helping me with the math. Thanks for watching, I've been Fargo, and stay hypnotized, folks. Toontown, Toon Tag is very self-explanatory.